Today we are looking at part 2 of creative writing, specifically writing a description or a story. Dear editor, if you wonder how I'm so good at creative writing, it's because I'm a published author. Now, in my last video, I taught you what the mark scheme is of creative writing, the things that the examiner looks for, and I talked you through structuring and paragraphing your work for effect. And also I taught you how to use sophisticated punctuation. If you missed that,
go back and watch it and then come back to this lesson.
Today, I want to start by looking at another thing from the mark scheme, vocabulary. I'm actually going to give you like a word bank of some of my favorite words, and if you start using them in your writing, it's going to make your writing seem really posh and sophisticated. Okay, get a pen and paper, let's write these down. Number 1, azure. It means light blue. Number 2, obsidian, means black. So if I'm describing like a daytime sky, I'll say the azure sky. And if I'm describing like a scary nighttime sky, I'll say the obsidian sky. Number 3, undulating. It's when something looks wavy. Wavy as in like has waves up and down. So you can say the ocean undulated in the breeze, or the trees were undulating to the melody of the wind, the mountains were undulating, anything that looks like that, yeah? Number 4, Midas kissed. Oh, posh one. Midas was the guy from Greek mythology, and everything he touched turned to gold. So obviously, if Midas kissed something, it would be gold. So if you say something is Midas kissed, we're saying it's golden. But it's really like sophisticated because you're using Greek mythology in your writing. Make sure you give Midas a capital M because it's the name of the guy. Number 5, it's actually a phrase, not a word. Kaleidoscope of colours. Kaleidoscope of colours. It means lots of different colours, a range of colours. So you'll say, as the sun began to set, a kaleidoscope of colours spread through the sky. Number 6, scintillating, means sparkling. So you can say something like the scintillating stars, which would be sibilance. Number 7, incessantly. It's when something is continuous, non-stop. The rain was incessantly banging against the windowsill. Number 8, I can't pronounce it properly, but elixir. It means a magical potion. I actually like using that as a metaphor. So if you're talking about a river or an ocean or something, any sort of water, then you can say, I stared at the elixir. And it's like you're calling it a magical potion, even though it's not really a magical potion. Number 9, cacophony. Cacophony is a mixture of unpleasant sounds. So you can say something like, as I stepped into the battlefield, the air was filled with a cacophony of screams and cries. Yeah, so it's like lots of different sounds. Number 10, dilapidated. Do you see I'm giving you a mixture of positive and negative words here, just in case like whatever comes up in your exam. Dilapidated is when a building is broken down. It's dilapidated. Use it as an adjective. Number 11, fragments. It just means tiny pieces, like fragments of glass, like tiny pieces. Number 12 is a phrase again, with trepidation. And it means you're doing something like kind of hesitantly, you're a bit anxious. With trepidation, I stepped towards the house. I was filled with trepidation. Number 13, really good one, ricocheted and reverberated. Get those spellings right, that's a hard one. Ricocheted and reverberated is when a sound is echoing around. So the gunshot ricocheted and reverberated around that. Number 14, holy water. I really like that and I want you to write it down because it's religious imagery. So again, if you're describing rain, instead of saying it was raining, call it holy water. So say, it was as if God had ripped open the clouds and was pouring holy water all over me. So it's a bit of like hyperbolic religious imagery in there. Number 15, my last one, is going to be every pixel of my skin. Now, pixels are what computerized images are made up of. You know when you zoom into a picture a lot and you see little squares? That's a pixel. So it's a metaphor by saying every pixel of my skin was filled with fear, because your skin's not really made of pixels, but you're saying every tiny piece of me was filled with fear. Right, so those are some of my favorite words. Make sure you write them down, start using them in your writing. I want to go on to language devices. Now, these are the devices you must use in your creative writing. And I want you to use every single one of these. I don't want you to leave any of them out and come out of your exam and say, oh, I didn't use a metaphor. Write them down for me. In order of preference, you must include personification, metaphor, simile, rhetorical question, onomatopoeia, alliteration or sibilance, or both, rule of three, oxymoron, religious imagery, and repetition. If you are unsure about what any of those mean, it's probably a good idea for you to go back to my language devices lesson and watch that before coming back here. Now, I want to practice using these language devices with a picture, as if we're in an exam. So have a look at this image. Let's practice. Personification is when you give something that is not human qualities. So about this picture, I'm going to imagine there's a moon in there, and I'm going to say, the moon was tired, desperately trying to light up the obsidian night sky. Do you see I chucked an obsidian in there as well? But the moon can't be tired because it's not a person. So that's personification. Metaphor. Let me look at the picture. The black blanket covered all the beauty and brightness behind it. Now the sky is not a black blanket, so I used a metaphor. And I also chucked in a bit of alliteration in there, black blanket, so we can tick that off too. Let's see if we can throw in a simile. Between the lunar mist, fragile snowflakes floated in the empty air before eventually decorating the ground like fragments of diamonds on the finest Indian silk. So that was my little like. The snow was like diamonds on the finest Indian silk. Religious imagery is obviously very sophisticated. Let me see if we can think of one about this picture. So I'm talking about the snow. They melted, leaving puddles of holy water that reflected the darkness from the hell above. So I've got my snow, it's melting into holy water, and you know in water you can see a reflection. I can see the reflection of the sky, and I'm calling it the hell above. Repetition, I'm gonna do it with a dash. It was terrifying, dash, absolutely terrifying. Let's add a little bit more onomatopoeia. Breaking the deafening silence, the wind whistled and howled before stopping altogether, creating an eerie stillness once again. I don't know if you noticed or not, deafening silence is an oxymoron, so I can tick off oxymoron as well. For a rule of three, I think I'm going to do it with an ellipsis. So I'm going to say, he looks cold. I'm going to say, I shuddered, I trembled, I froze. Love that. Let's keep going. I need a rhetorical question about this picture. Okay, so maybe he's going to spot something. I'm going to say, what was that in the distance? Question mark. So we've looked at vocabulary, we've looked at language devices. Let's talk about sentence structure, because that's something we haven't spoken about from the mark scheme yet. We don't want every sentence to be the same length. And we don't want every sentence to start with the. It's so boring to read. I want to look at some different types of sentences. A simple sentence is the same as a main clause. Something like, the sun was setting. Lovely. Simple, no comma, and it just makes sense by itself. the sun was setting. Okay, that's the main clause. A complex sentence, though, is made up of a main clause and a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause is a bit of extra information that needs a comma. So something like this. In the distance, comma, the sun began to set. Do you see I can't come to you and say, hey, in the distance? Because you won't know what I'm talking about. In the distance what? That's a subordinate clause, extra information with a comma. Now there are different types of subordinate clauses that we can start our sentences with, so we're not always starting our sentences in the same way. I'm going to give you some options. We can start with where something is. That is called a preposition. So we can say, in the distance, the sun began to set. Where was the sun? In the distance. You know, like things like, under the bed, comma, there was a monster. Standing in the corner, in the azure sky, the clouds were, like starting with where something is. You can also start with when something happened. So you can say, before I knew it, comma, the sun began to set. Yeah, when did it happen? Before I knew it. At midnight, comma, that kind of thing. You can start a sentence with an adverb, which is an ly word. So you can say, gently, comma, the sun began to set. Or you can start a sentence with an ing word, with a verb. So you can say, moving towards the waves, comma, the sun began to set. Now, plot twist. Subordinate clauses don't just go at the start of your sentences. They can also go at the end. So you can say, the sun began to set, comma, moving towards the waves. And then when you get really clever, you can split your main clause in half and go in the middle with what I call a comma sandwich. And you can say, the sun, comma, moving towards the waves, comma, began to set. So do you see I took that main clause, I split it in half, and I chucked the subordinate in there with a comma on either side. And if you're really trying to be sophisticated, you can put a subordinate clause at the beginning and the end of the sentence to create some extra long sentences. So you can say something like, gently, comma, the sun began to set, comma, moving towards the waves. Right, let's see an example of what your writing will look like when we put all the things we have spoken about together. Do you see we have got, if we go back to that whole ingredients list, we have got loads of language devices. We've got sophisticated vocabulary. We've got all of our sophisticated punctuation. We've got long and short sentences. We've got different sentence starters, and we've got a one-line paragraph. So just in that little bit that we just wrote, we are hitting that examiner's mark scheme and on our way to get a grade 9. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you feel a bit more confident about your creative writing. If you found the video useful, please do give it a like and don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series.